How you guys doing? Oh, lovely bunch. I like them. So yeah, I'm Lisa Jones. Super easy to remember. Um, Philip met me at the door and said, say something encouraging. I'm all, I got lots of encouragement. That's perfect. Look, so I'm local. I was born and raised in LA, and so a crazy background. Yeah, totally. Like, I think one of those people that, I don't know about you guys, but I'm one of those people that if there's a mistake I can make, I'm totally gonna do it. You know, I gotta see if that's really a mistake. You know what I mean? And so they always would say that the hard people, and I know I probably don't look like it, I'm like a white 50-something-year-old grandma now, so, you know, let's not, you know, decide how I was when I was younger. But anyway, just really doing a lot of things that go, okay, that's gonna take me out of the equation in terms of having a good life and recovering from past stuff, you know. And so that's kind of my story. That's what I'm the embodiment of transformation and going, oh, hey, wait, there's second chances. I can flip it and it can be different, you know. I remember at one point I was in Van Nuys at it was an orientation for people coming out of prison, right? And there was like 150 people, and I remember thinking to myself, man, that's a lot of people getting out right now. You know, if you just think about it, the numbers are kind of staggering because they have these orientations all the time. And one of the things that had happened was some of these guys, you know, were like, okay, maybe I can do this, right? And so, and I was just a little bit ahead of them, so I had the benefit of going, oh, no, wait, yeah, you can. And so I was there just observing, and several of them were kind of asking questions, you know, like, hey, you know, if I go to the unemployment office, will I be able to get a job, you know? Because they're saying, we have all these jobs and everything. And so they're asking, like, well, would I make enough money, right? Because you got to think about, can I pay my car insurance? Can I pay my, you know, child support? Can I, whatever's on their plate, right? Restitution, and can I keep lights on? Can I be the man and get a job and do this thing, right? Even though you know, in society he's probably saying I totally suck and I have no hope. But you're saying I got some, so he's trying to grab hold of his hope. And the guy says to him, well, are you a doctor? I can tell you what you'd make if you're a doctor. And I'm thinking to myself, it's probably likely he's not a doctor, you know? And I just felt like his little hope that he was trying to grab hold of was just taken in a second, you know? And that's one of the things that let's give a happy ending to that story. They ended up not having a motivational speaker, so they said, oh, hey, my friend's a motivational speaker, so they gave me the mic. You know, the first thing I said, well, hey, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it's, at the end of the day, I even asked them, because they were talking about IDs and how they were required to have IDs, I said, and they started out with passport. Can you give your passport? I'm thinking, well, how many of you guys come out of prison with your passport? And they're like, nobody raised their hand. I said, that's okay. I didn't come out with my passport either. But I have one now, and boy, does it have a lot of stamps. I just had to get a new one because it doesn't expire for another 7 years, but it's full. And so it's that whole idea of, yeah, we make mistakes. Yeah, we do something wrong. But if we stay there, if we don't go, so I don't know what your particular thing is, but I know when I was a teenager, I was, like I said, if there was something I could do wrong, I seemed to be able to find trouble and not be afraid of it. You know, I had all kinds of stuff, you know, my background, my family was kind of crazy and real crazy. Dad in and out of jail. And mom just kind of emotionally not there. And so I just scooped myself up into the whirlwind of chaos. And I stayed there for like 23 years. So I didn't just do a little bit. I mean, I was, you know, like I said, everything from, you know, running the streets and doing time. And so, and at the end of the day, you go, okay, I just messed up, so there's no coming back. And I think that that's what I would encourage you, because it's regardless of whether you make a little mistake, like maybe make your friend mad and now she won't talk to you anymore, or something, you know, maybe a little bit bigger. No matter what it is, you know what the thing about making mistakes is we're so hard on ourselves. Like, oh, I suck. I'm the worst, you know, and then the other half of the day we had to try to build ourselves back up again. Does anybody live in that place?
Yeah.
where you're kind of like having these two conversations with yourself. You're either trying to tell yourself, no, I'm good, or you're trying to tell yourself, you suck, you know, and it's like these two extremes are just, I don't know, they just kind of come down like a storm that you can't stop. And so living in that place, so here's the deal. So at some point I had one person, kind of like a Melody, you know, who said, you can do this. Like, wait a minute. There's a whole lot of amazing stuff in you. And if you just start looking at that and pull that out, if you just start making that your focus and try to catch that self-talk that says, oh, but you did this, or oh, but you're behind in this, or whatever it is, right? Or, but oh, hey, you know, so-and-so, you know, said this about you, must be true, they wouldn't have said it. You know, if you don't spend too much time there and you keep filling yourself with the self-talk, what you're doing is you're creating even just this pathway in your brain that's going to bring to you the positivity and the connections that you need to make to actually live out your strengths. Does that make sense? If you think about a path, and I love to hike, so most of my hikes, their paths are already there though. I'm not trying to create a new one. And really, I want to encourage you to live your life in such a way that you're constantly creating new paths in your brain. And the minute you start cutting through a new path, you can't just see it clearly. You have to cut through again and keep walking down it and walking down it and walking down it. And it's the same way with the positive self-talk. It's that voice inside that says, you know, I am good. There is so much good in me, and I know it. And regardless of whether somebody says something or I think I might believe something bad about myself, I'm actually going to stop that path, close that trail up, and let it just grow weeds. And I'm going to only walk the path that identifies the goodness in us, right? The strengths, the things that make you who you are today. Guys, from going to that place where I was a fugitive, I was wanted, I was being hunted down. I mean, it wasn't like a little bitty mistake. I mean, it was a big one. So I know what I'm talking about when I say you can overcome and you can constantly live your lives as overcomers, right? And so, not that I mean, I don't know every story, so I'm just saying what I think is going on. But what happened in the last couple of years is not only have I been able to just, I mean, have an incredible life where I've been in YWAM for 18 years, traveled for 18 years, been all over the world, just got done this year, 14 flights already. Sweden, Switzerland, Barcelona, Spain, Germany, Berlin, Stuttgart, the Czech Republic. So many planes. Right now I'm living out of a suitcase. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I just want to be home for like a week. Can I do that? You know, like, so, but for the last couple of years, I've got to go to northern Iraq and work with girls. What are the age range here? What's the ages?
15 to 25.
Work with girls 15 to 25 who've been rescued from ISIS. I've got my degree in psychology, have some training in debriefing, and I did trauma debrief with girls that were rescued and fresh out of captivity from ISIS. Suffering trauma that I'm familiar with some traumatic situations that I've experienced in myself, but I've never seen this level of trauma in my life. And what an honor to get to go. And day after day after day, help these girls just begin to see a little glimmer of hope. Just by giving them a platform and the tools to tell their story. Right? And that's one of the things I want to encourage you guys, is you've got to figure out what is your story. And for these girls, recognize for them, I mean, talk about encouraging to overcome. Right there, smack dab in the middle of their lives, they have to overcome being trafficked and tortured in a way that most we want to experience. And not just that, guys. That captivity, what prefaced that captivity was the slaughter of their family members, the men in their. So what I learned was, okay, how can I talk to them about overcoming? Well, you know what? It was because I myself have become an overcomer. I myself have walked through this. So this door opened And I went, well, I guess I'm qualified. I guess I'm qualified to say, regardless of what our obstacles are, you know, what is it U2 says, you know, love is bigger than anything that gets in its way, right? And you gotta love yourself. You gotta accept yourself for who you are. And once you can do that, you can accept your failures and go, yeah, I did that. Or yeah, that happened to me and that was hard. You know, but that's all part of life. We all have to get to that place where we can move through obstacles and that are in our way, right? And so, and I just want to encourage you, don't do it a little bit. Do you see that? I don't think I have a little bit of a recovery story. You know, does that make sense? I don't go, oh, I'm just trying to do it day to day and just trying to stay clean. I don't think about any of that stuff I used to do. It doesn't occupy space in my mind because my life has now been so encompassed with the things that I value and the things that I've become. And I know it's heavy talking about that whole couple of years I've been back and forth. But even when I was in Europe, guys, I had the opportunity to see some of these girls and follow up with them. And they have a brand new life. And they have all this opportunity that they could never get in that region of the world because they weren't allowed to be free. And God moves us and kind of does a little shifting. And sometimes it's physically where we live or where we're at or in our schools or our friends. And there's all these dynamics. But often it's shifting in our heart. And there's some ridiculous goodness in this room. You know, I could see it in your eyes. And you know it. You think about it. You go, I'm good. You know, be bold enough to keep saying that. But also make sure you believe it. Because, you know, right? Our world today, media, all I have to say is we are where we are. And if ever we need world changers and boldness and courage to be true to yourself, your real self. So all those other years of craziness, I wasn't my real self. But now I've found my real self and I'm making an impact. And it's just fun. And I love it. I was supposed to go to Hawaii this spring, so there's a little thing. I didn't want to go. Isn't it interesting that I'd rather be in Iraq than Hawaii? But see, that's how I come out of all this is my passion is for people. My passion is that we get past whatever it is. Because sometimes it's a little thing, sometimes it's a big thing, guys. Because this is real true life. You know? There's a lot of obstacles. And a lot of sadness and hardship. And we need one another to encourage each other, but you got to encourage yourself, okay? If you can't encourage everybody else and then let yourself down, because then you don't really have that kind of authority. You got to know encouragement works, because you got to make sure that everybody else you love can be encouraged by you. But if it's not working in your life, how can you believe it for someone else's? So, yeah, that is that. Any questions or anything? Any comments? Any thoughts? I know it's like, boom, it's like a big water hose. So they say, when you just turn it on, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's like, what just happened? Yeah.
I have a question for you, Lisa. So you mentioned the work you're doing with the girls who've been trafficked. Is that kind of one of the burdens, one of the things that you're passionate about is human trafficking, or is it more? Is it right now your focus on the Middle East and what's going on there?
Yeah. You know, a lot of work with refugees. It's interesting. It's kind of, there's two angles. So I do a lot of training with young adults. So people, you know, well, probably like the girls that come here. I do a lot of training with young adults, 18 to 22. Leadership development is the focus. But it's always moving them towards their passions and the things that are on their heart that would make sense for them, you know. So it's kind of like, if you're really, really passionate about healthcare, And you need to go after that, right? You need to get involved in healthcare, because it's one thing to just do a career for finances, but it's another thing to follow your passions, because at the end of the day, you're going to spend a lot of time in your life doing these things. So, but for me to actually have the authority to really drive that into the lives of young people, I also have to remember where I come from, and where I come from is a great deal of trauma. And so, they say in AA and NA, they would say, always give back. And so it just comes out of me because, I have been involved on the streets. I have been involved in prostitution, and I have a long history of similar things, and now nothing compared to what these girls have suffered. But also, there's just been that desire to get trained and to do what I would call just solid recovery from trauma. And that's something that I've experienced, so that's something I can give out. So I would say it's kind of both at this point. I do a lot of training, but I also do a lot of hands-on, because times change, and the way that we champion one another looks different today, right? And I think if you don't have your finger on the pulse of what's happening with people, you may sometimes bring in an older model that isn't applying to what's real time. So that dropped in my lap. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about going to Iraq, and it just, boom, it just dropped in my lap, but I knew I was supposed to. Guys, I got on a flight and flew myself. Every trip has been by myself. I go when I have to travel and get there and navigate the city, and it's scary.
Yeah.
Because until you get with a group, then you're like, okay, at least I'm with somebody. But even then, walking around on the streets, it's minimal, because you don't want to be seen, because, one of the things that they do is, for high profile attention, is to kidnap. So you're risking your life. And that was something I never ever had in me, because it was always self-preservation and survival. I didn't do nothing for nobody. You see? But really, that's not what I was made to do. I was made to actually love and give. And when all the other stuff could get healed and I could let it go, then I could be who I was supposed to be. And it was to love and to give. It's interesting. They say that. They say most leaders, who haven't quite found their way, you just see it all kind of craziness, but what they're really trying to do is exercise a leadership gifting in them. But you see it manifesting in all the wrong ways. In other words, I need to make decisions because I'm a decision maker. But sometimes what happens is our decision making isn't honed, that skill isn't honed, so it's a lot of the wrong decisions, but you're making them, Do you see that? And so, I was doing time, they would always come in and say, oh, you guys are a bunch of leaders. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But I'm like, they're right. They were right. I hated some of that talking there because, it just seems programmed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you dismiss it, but then later you go, oh, I think there was some truth to that, But it's hard, and that's one of the things too, is leaders are really difficult because they have their own mind and their own ideas, it's harder to get through. I'm one of the worst. If you put me on these chairs, I have to navigate all of my issues with that person speaking before I finally go, I gotta let them in the heart. We got something to say, I'm sure, it'd be teachable. Because sometimes when you feel that leadership burden, it's hard to be teachable, right? So, yeah.
Lisa, I don't know if you feel like this would be appropriate here. Maybe you could tiptoe into it. But you shared with me a little bit about the situation with ISIS and some of what happens. And I think for most of us, we're kind of ignorant about the way things are in that part of the world. Will you feel comfortable sharing a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, I think, we have Facebook and social media, so we do have so many, but we are disconnected. And so when you go somewhere, you actually go, oh, whoa, this is what's happening, and you see it, right? It's like if somebody calls you and tells you, I don't know, like, oh my goodness, I just wrecked my car, but you haven't seen it. But then you go to the car, to the junkyard, or you go to the accident scene, and then you see it, you go, whoa, this is real. That car is mangled, right? So do you see what I'm saying? So it's that be there. And so in being there, look, guys, these are, it's a people group that's really old in that region. And so they're very like cut off. So very simple living, villagers, shepherds, you know, they kind of have their community and they're tight knit, and they don't let anybody in. So they don't marry outside, you know. So it's like if you're not a city person, you can even marry outside. So, but what's that's kind of done in a Muslim nation is said, well, you think you can be who you are there, but we're all Muslim. So in other words, they're way too different, so they gotta go. So they live in a place where they've been basically given a place to live in out in the desert, and what ISIS did was said, we're gonna go after them. This group has had 74 genocides. They're one of the most persecuted people in the world. 74 times people have tried to wipe them out. And so they have this history. Can you imagine? I'd be like, I have a chip on my shoulder, like, why would I want to wipe me out? You know, right? Wouldn't you be like, you know, so they're carrying the weight of their history as a people, and then ISIS shows up, and they have no military. So the Kurdistan region that they're in, in Iraq, it's divided into, Kurdistan is the north, and Baghdad, Fallujah, you know, those kind of areas are the south. There are two different kinds of Muslim faith, and that's the warring faction there, is Shiite and Sunni. So the Kurds are Sunni. They have their own history of being, you know, of attempted to be wiped out, and they still are dealing with their own level of persecution. But you know how it is, the big bully beats on the middle guy, and then the middle guy beats on the younger guy, and that's kind of the way things roll there. And so these guys are on the bottom of the barrel. So they don't have anybody else, and they wouldn't to be, you know, but they're just victims there. And so what ISIS did was in 2014 was ISIS was making its advance into the northern region. There was Peshmerga, there's PKK and Peshmerga, so there's a couple of military people that all the Americans went and trained military. These were the guys. They were present around the village, but when ISIS made its move, they actually realized they couldn't come up against them, so they left. And so all of these people who were unarmed and unprepared were just slaughtered. And one of the things they did in one of the villages was they literally just kind of surrounded it, and they just stayed there for days and weeks. And one day they said, all right, everybody in this village, they rushed them all into a school. Yeah. And they divided the men and women. And then they took all the men off and killed them all, every one of them. The young boys were put into military and brainwashed, basically. And all the women, the elderly women were killed because they were of no use. And then the younger women were taken and sold as sex slaves. Some of the people in the village got away. And in their own country, they still can't, they're refugees now. They can't live in their village. It's been completely destroyed. They have no place to live, so they live in tents. They get a little bit of money from the government, and they can't move into the other cities in their own country because they're Yazidis and they're not welcome. You see, it'd be like if something happened with us and we all had to leave LA because it was destroyed, and we all kind of said, well, we're going to go up towards the Central Valley, and they said, oh no, you can't live here. And you can go out in the desert and live in a tent. Well, this is our state. This is our state too. We contribute to the economy, you know, right? It's like that. So here, they're even in their own country, they're not protected. Does that make sense? So there's tens of thousands of them, and they live in tents, and there's no hope for them to get rebuilt because the country's not going to invest in their city. And so, and they're not wanted there. It's like they're literally waiting to just be all wiped out. It's overwhelming, the situation there. And even for the girls that were rescued, they were driven through in trucks through some of the cities, but nobody did a thing because they went, well, they're just your cities and it's ISIS, we're not going to say nothing. So it's like they were watching all what was happening, but nobody would step in. Does that make sense? Because the ISIS had really dominated the region. A lot of them were taken to Mosul, and that's where they were sold from. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Zach?
Thank you.
Yeah. And so that's why, in the refugee movement now that we look at, like I was just in Europe, and it's interesting because, imagine if 1 million people came to our city. I mean, that's not a little bit, that's a lot. And so everything's been changed in those communities, like Germany's taken over 1 million people. And so everywhere you go, you see the change in their dynamic, right? Now, LA is pretty diverse. We think we're diverse, but I'm like, I think more diversity is coming, It's just the way things are happening. There's a people movement unlike any other time in our world, really. But some of the places that didn't have the diversity, per se, that we have, those are all changing. And it's you can just see the tension in those cities. Athens, Greece is another one, And a lot of these refugees, guys, they put them up at is in prisons. So one of them's in an old prison, and there's these riots that are happening within it on a daily basis. And what happens too is, it's a big deal. The refugee crisis is very real. And here's the saddest part, though, is we're talking a lot of these people are families, and they have had to run for their life. Even today, they're still fleeing from Syria. So they had kind of a peace break where they had, just to allow people to escape the city. But I mean, you go there and you go, okay, this should not be happening in our world today. And then you hear some of our own headlines and go, really, is this the biggest deal? It's unbelievable. And so it wears on you a little bit. I have to do a lot of processing when I go. Because you think, okay, how can this happen? So I don't know where I'm headed in terms of those two things, but I'm on a little bit of a break because I've run 6 schools in a row and just got done traveling the entire year. I have not been able to stop in the process. So.
Any more questions for Lisa? I just want to point this out in case this didn't land on you. She just brushed over her story, but when she goes in detail, I mean, I think I could say this and read well enough. There was a time in her life when she felt like she was a nobody. Is that right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And if you hear her background, the things that happened in her family, the chaos that then, she kind of brought into her own life, and the patterns of thinking, the patterns of reacting, she would be, in her own words, she would just say, she was like, like on the lowest of the low tier, that nobody would look up to her. But what happened is, while she was in prison, God got a hold of her life, and something really magnificent changed. And what I love about what she said is, she's a world changer now, and a life changer. Like, she's going to this place. That story that she said about ISIS, that's hard to hear, right? But she's going and looking at people that feel like they're nobodies and saying, you're somebody, and giving them skills. And you know what she said, there's leadership in this room, and there's goodness in this room. And that's a story for us. Some of you are world changers.
Yeah.
Some of you are life changers, and you don't even know it yet.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think that at the end of the day, you might have a sense. I remember when I was in high school, I was like, man, I think I might have had an overinflated ego. I had this, strong belief that there was something really, I was going to live like really intentionally and great, that there was something there, but it was all, wild and filtered through all the wounds. It was being filtered through all the chaos. So that's why I say, I want to encourage you guys to walk your process out, do something, I don't know. I love the tree of life because it's a way of looking at your whole life. It's a narrative therapy tool, but it's drawing a tree and taking all the components and I can give you the information. But at the end of the day, what happens is you have your roots, you have where you come from, and that doesn't change. I don't care how much we like it, how much we don't like it. Where I came from was where I came from. And I needed somehow to figure out that that's okay. And actually, the part of who I am as a tree, the part of who I am as a person has everything to do with the way I was shaped there. No matter, even the areas I didn't like, even the things I did wrong or somebody else did wrong to me, right? And the ground is kind of the breakthrough, and that's the thing. That's what I say. I want to encourage you, because you got to break through that ground. You know, like a little tree pops through the cement or whatever. You got to break through whatever it is that is your thing, right? Because we all have something that wants to kind of cause us to resist stepping out and being being free, right? You know, that one of my biggest fears when I went to jail and I got saved was I didn't want God to make me a dork. I was like, I don't want you to make me all cheesy, you know, and I don't want to be, I don't know, I just thought he was going to take all of me away and make, you know, all the good parts, which was silly because there was no good parts at that time. Do you see what I'm saying? And so we get a little tricked. We get a little tricked about what we believe and what we think about ourselves. But guys, you'll know if you've nailed it if other people's lives are being impacted and yours is just feeling good. If you wake up in the morning and go, man, I like who I am right now. I just want to keep getting better. Then you're nailing it. But if that's like an indicator. It's like, oh, okay, cool, check. I think I'm doing it, you know? So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
coming. If you have questions, see her after, but